Welcome to Module 2, Reflex Action, Conditioned Reflexes, and the Role of Genetics in Evolution. We begin with the fundamental idea of reflexes, introduced through Skinner's famous observation of a salamander's severed toe. The tail, despite being disconnected from the body, still responded to touch. This observation challenged early notions that behavior was driven purely by inner agents such as willpower or spirit. What emerged from this and similar observations was a scientific understanding of behavior as a response to external stimuli. The stimulus controls the behavior, and the behavior itself is the reflex. So the key concept here is that reflex is automatic, unlearned response to a specific external stimulus. This concept helps demystify behaviors that were once thought to be under the control of inner forces. Skinner showed that reflexes could be studied quantitatively, and much of an organism's response to specific stimuli are actually predictable. However, these reflexes account for only a small portion of the overall behavioral repertoire. Conditioned reflexes, as demonstrated by Pavlov, extended our understanding of behavior by showing that a neutral stimulus can acquire the ability to elicit a response. This process happens when a neutral stimulus is repeatedly paired with an unconditioned stimulus. Pavlov's careful control over the experimental conditions allowed him to avoid mentalistic explanations, such as the idea that the dogs were thinking of food. Instead, he demonstrated that the stimulus itself could come to elicit the same reflex as the original unconditioned stimulus. Conditioning shows that novel stimuli can come to elicit reflexive behaviors through association. Pavlov's psychic secretion experiment is the foundation for understanding conditioned reflexes, where stimuli like the sound of a bell could make dogs salivate in anticipation of food. This careful scientific control allowed Pavlov to avoid explanatory fictions and how behaviors could be conditioned. And as you can see in this picture, the bell is a misnomer. Pavlov actually used a tuning fork as the auditory stimulus. So reflexes play an essential role in survival. These behaviors have evolved to help organisms respond quickly and effectively to environmental stimuli, ensuring their survival. However, not all conditioned reflexes are beneficial. In fact, some reflexes can become maladaptive, such as when someone develops an irrational fear of flying, triggered by what's typically an increased heart rate. These behaviors, while conditioned, can reinforce an illusion of control, such as the person gripping an armrest during turbulence. Although they cannot actually control turbulence, the conditioned behavior persists. So while reflexes have an evolutionary survival value, conditioned responses can sometimes be maladaptive, reflecting an overextension of survival mechanisms into areas where they may not serve a useful purpose. Though conditioned reflexes are an important part of behavior, they do not account for all types of behavior. As Skinner pointed out, conditioning increases the scope of stimuli that can elicit responses, but it does nothing to create novel behaviors. Once a behavior moves beyond conditioned reflexes, such as a person adopting a specific body posture in response to fear, we enter the realm of operant conditioning. So again, classical conditioning extends the range of eliciting stimuli, but doesn't generate new responses. Novel behaviors require operant conditioning, where behaviors are shaped and, of course, reinforced by their consequences. To fully understand behavior, we must consider both genetic inheritance and learning. Skinner warns us not to confuse these two processes that produce similar outcomes, and that is natural selection and operant conditioning. While these processes may yield behaviors that look similar, they arise from fundamentally different mechanisms. In phylogeny, behaviors are shaped and passed down across generations through natural selection. These behaviors are often essential for the survival of the species. For example, many species exhibit reflexes or instincts that are inherited and shared by all members of the species. These inherited behaviors have been selected over time because they enhance the organism's ability to survive and reproduce in a particular environment. On the other hand, ontogeny refers to behaviors that are learned during an organism's lifetime. This process involves operant conditioning, where behaviors are shaped by the consequences they produce through reinforcement and punishment. Unlike phylogeny, where behaviors are passed down genetically, ontogeny relies on an organism's interaction with its immediate environment. So let's look at these separately a little more. In discussing phylogeny, Skinner emphasized that certain behaviors, like reflexes or, quote, instinctive actions, are hardwired into the species. These behaviors do not require learning. They are inherited and then triggered by environmental stimuli. For instance, behaviors such as birds migrating or a spider spinning a web are behaviors that have been naturally selected over thousands of generations, if not more, to enhance survival. Importantly, these behaviors are difficult to change because they are part of the organism's evolutionary history. So phylogeny refers to behaviors that evolved over generations and are passed down through genetic inheritance. These behaviors are typically fixed and served as a survival function. So as I mentioned, a spider spinning a web is an innate behavior that does not require learning. It is passed down through generations, and it's essential for the spider's survival, allowing it to catch prey without any formal training. Similarly, reflexive actions such as withdrawing from pain or the fight or flight response are phylogenetically determined and enhance the likelihood of survival. Ontogeny, in contrast, refers to behaviors that are learned through the interaction with the environment. These behaviors are shaped by operant conditioning, the process where behaviors are reinforced or punished. Skinner emphasized that the environment plays a crucial role in shaping behavior during the organism's lifetime. Unlike phylogeny, where behaviors are passed down genetically, these behaviors are not innate. They develop as a result of an organism's experience with its environment. For instance, a child may learn to speak a language or ride a bicycle through reinforcement, or a pigeon may learn to peck a button for food in a laboratory experiment. Ontogeny refers to the process by which behaviors are learned during an organism's life, typically through reinforcement or punishment. So remember, if a pigeon is taught to press a lever to receive food, that behavior is learned through conditioning, operant conditioning. This behavior did not exist prior to the training, but through reinforcement, the pigeon acquired the behavior. Similarly, humans learn to speak, read, and perform tasks based on contingencies present in their environment, rather than through genetic inheritance. So it's important to recognize that phylogeny and ontogeny are not mutually exclusive. They interact to shape the behavior of individuals. Phylogenetic behaviors provide a foundation upon which learned behaviors can be built. For example, humans' ability to learn language is facilitated by our phylogenetic predisposition to process sounds and to produce speech. However, Skinner cautioned us not to confuse the two. While it may be tempting to attribute behaviors we cannot easily explain to phylogenetic processes, we must carefully consider whether those behaviors were in fact learned through experience. Skinner highlighted this distinction in his discussion of contingencies of reinforcement, which is ontogeny, versus contingencies of survival, which is phylogeny. So imagine training a pigeon to perform a complex sequence of behaviors, such as pecking a lever, turning around, and then flapping its wings to receive food. To an observer, this might seem mysterious or instinctual, but every step of the behavior can be traced back to the shaping process during the training. This is ontogeny at work. In contrast, a bird's ability to build a nest or fly south for the winter, those involve behaviors that are passed down through phylogeny. Another key point is that genes provide the foundation for behavior, but they don't directly determine it. As more explained, genes predispose individuals to certain susceptibilities, but they don't cause the behavior outright. This means that while our genetic makeup provides the physical structures that enable behavior, it's the environment that ultimately shapes how behaviors are expressed. While genes influence the behavior, it's the contingencies of reinforcement that offer the greatest insight into prediction and control of behavior. The ability to learn and adapt through reinforcement provides the flexibility that phylogenetic behaviors lack. Moore stated that, quote, operant conditioning complements natural selection, and that genes predispose an individual's susceptibility to influence from the environment. And these two concepts are not mutually exclusive for species survival. However, we usually get into the discussion as to which is which. Well, we don't always know. And Skinner reminded us, just because we cannot see the specific contingencies that shaped one's repertoire does not mean we automatically file it under natural selection. More eloquently, Moore stated, genetic endowment must be analyzed cautiously, as it has become a dumping ground for behaviorists. So let me draw a parallel to our applied world, where the automatic function often becomes default function when we can't readily see the maintaining consequences, right? Like an undifferentiated assessment doesn't necessarily mean it's automatic. Remember that reinforcement occurs with or without the organism's knowledge. Our personal histories are not excluded. So let this be a warning to all scientists that just because the evidence is not immediately seen, it does not mean that it doesn't exist. Always refrain from defaulting to the easy explanation. Parsimony does not equate to easy. It's just the simplest explanation based on the evidence at hand. So when talking about how the consequences of operant behavior can be passed on to generations, there's an example from Moore regarding the variation of one's specific characteristics. Moore referred to these characteristics as one's ability to, quote, run faster, jump higher, hear better. Relating this to the development of operant behavior, these characteristics give us the skills needed to act in a way which would elicit a consequence. After all, Moore defined operant behavior as a function of contingencies, of actions yielding consequences. If you walk away with only a few components, this should be one of them. Also, we cannot bank on a genetic trait being reinforced in the environment. During my boardroom over the COVID restrictions, I had one of those DNA tests completed, and it turns out apparently I have the gene that makes cilantro taste like soap. And if you're not familiar, people either love or hate cilantro. Well, I love it. There's something about a street taco completely covered in those green shavings that make my day. So here, as it almost always does with our behavior, the operant world has the capability to overrule genetic activation. Or possibly it was an inaccurate test. Either way, the point does remain the same. Genetics play a foundational role in our behavior, but it's critical to avoid attributing behavior solely to genes. As Moore pointed out, genes predispose an individual to be influenced by the environment, but they don't cause behavior. And so one of the most important genetic abilities in humans is the capacity for imitation, which allows organisms to learn behaviors by observing others. However, individuals, say with autism, this ability might be impaired. So neuroscientific research, such as the study from Science Daily on the mirror neurons this week, indicated that impairments in imitation may be linked to a dysfunction in the brain's mirror neuron system. So the key concept here is genes set the stage for behavior by influencing the organism's susceptibility to environmental influences. But behaviors still develop in the context of learning and reinforcement. It is interaction with the environment that determines how behavior unfolds. So the research on mirror neurons highlighted the importance of environmental manipulation in shaping behavior. For children with autism who may struggle with imitation, mirrors can be used as an effective tool to provide feedback and reinforce imitative responses. This method relies on operant conditioning, reinforcing desired behaviors and using environment as the driving force for learning. So 4 years ago, David Sloan Wilson delivered the Presidential Scholar Address at ADAI. David Sloan Wilson is an evolutionary biologist that championed for something known as group selection, or as he coined it, multi-level selection. This evolutionary theory is how these biologists take on the way in which gene selection and individual selection actually work overall in the evolutionary process. Taking a direct quote here, this framework argues that while genes serve as the means by which organisms' designs are transmitted across generations, individuals and groups are vehicles for those genes, and both are arenas for genes to act on. Indeed, genes themselves can be affected by selection, not just because of their effects on the design of the vehicle, which is the organism, but also because of their effect on the functioning of the DNA of which they reside. Skinner had already presented a framework of cultural selection to explain how behaviors evolve and are sustained across generations within individuals and within cultures. These three levels of selection help us understand the complexity of behavior and its interaction with the environment. Selection by consequences is cultural selection. Cultural selection refers to the behaviors and practices that are passed down across generations, not through genetics, but through social transmission. Cultural practices evolve because they benefit the group or society as a whole, even though they may not directly benefit the individual. Cultural selection occurs when certain behaviors or practices are reinforced by the social environment, allowing them to be transmitted across various members of the group. Cultural practices such as rituals, traditions, language, and social norms are selected and maintained when they contribute to the survival or even just the cohesion of a group. So these three levels of selection are interrelated and together provide a comprehensive understanding of behavior. Phylogenetic behaviors form the biological foundation. Ontogenetic behaviors allow for individual learning and adaptation, and cultural behaviors help maintain social cohesion and traditions across generations. By understanding these three levels, we can learn how behavior is not solely the result of one factor, but rather the complex interplay of evolution, learning, and social practices. By understanding these processes, we can better predict and influence behavior in various contexts, whether that be an evolutionary, educational, or a social framework. So one of the main controversies that came from Darwin's work was the thought of eugenics, where we could selectively breed to improve the human race. But what kind of implications could that present? Well, we tried this with chickens. The importance of cultural evolution above individual evolution is exemplified with this. In 1990, there was an experiment at Purdue University, and researchers wanted to increase the egg-laying productivity of hens. The hens were housed in cages with 9 hens per cage. Very simply, the most productive hen from each cage was selected to breed the next generation of hens. So if egg-laying productivity is an inheritable trait, then the experiment should produce a strain of better egg layers. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, the experiment produced a strain of hyper-aggressive hens. After some time, there were only 3 hens left in some of the cages because the other 6 were murdered, and the survivors that would remain would have all of their feathers plucked from the incessant attacks. So in short, egg productivity plummeted, even though the best egg layers had been selected each and every generation. So seeing what had happened, they adjusted the experiment to select the highest producing group of 9 to breed the next generation. In this sense, the best traits that worked together were kept together, and this result was increased egg production. Okay, so in this lecture, we've explored the complex interplay between reflex actions, conditioned reflexes, genetic and evolutionary influences, as well as the 3 levels of selection. Behavior, as Skinner and others have shown us, is not simply the product of inner agents like willpower or instincts, but rather shaped by a variety of external and internal forces acting across different timescales. At the most basic level, reflexes can provide us with an automatic unlearned response to external stimuli that probably saved our butts. Moving beyond these simple reflexes, conditioned reflexes demonstrate how environmental stimuli can come to control behavior through associations, a process that extends our behavioral repertoire, but still limited within scope. We explored the role of genetics and evolutionary theory in shaping behavior, emphasizing the difference between phylogeny, the inherited behaviors passed down through natural selection, and ontogeny, the learned behaviors acquired through the reinforcement during the individual's lifetime. These 2 processes, while distinct, often interact to shape behavior in ways that enhance survival and adaptability. Adding to this framework, we examine Skinner's idea of the 3 levels of selection. Together, these levels of selection provide a comprehensive understanding of how behaviors evolve, are learned, and maintained within individuals across generations. By understanding these multiple influences, ranging from genetic predispositions to cultural practices, we can better predict, influence, and control behavior in a variety of contexts. Whether we're studying how behaviors emerge from evolutionary pressures, how they are reinforced through operant conditioning, or how they are passed down through cultural practices, behavior analysis gives us the tools to understand and shape behaviors in ways that are both scientifically grounded and practically useful.